Thank you all so much. And we do have a lot of great questions in the chat for everyone, really. So I can go through and just mention some of these. And I think we may even call in some of our other panelists who weren't in this particular panel to answer perhaps some of these questions. So the first question I have here is, it's really fascinating to listen to all these topics. Well, this is a comment, and I want to celebrate this comment. This is from Hina Parek. It says, I shall definitely do vegan Paryushan and remain vegan. So we applaud you for that, Hina, for having that insight and transformation through the event itself. And she thanks all of us for such an enlightening afternoon. Another person says this, and this is for the Jain Vegan Initiative. They may have answered this question already. I'm joining from Seattle. I'm not sure if there is any presence of Jain Vegan Initiative in the greater Seattle area. Would definitely love to be more involved if there's already a group here. So perhaps Sunny or Pratik or Nisha can address that question. I know that there are meetups, and you mentioned the meetups.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go ahead and take it. We actually do have a pretty large presence within the Seattle community. So there's obviously a large Jain Dharma there. And we also have a local WhatsApp group just for Jain Vegan meetups. And so we'd love for you to be a part of it. So we can post a link in the chat for that.
Great. Thanks so much. I always enjoy seeing on Jain Vegan Initiative's Instagram page, if you don't follow them, they have pictures from the meetups, as Sunny showed, from all over the world. So you can always see what's happening in your local place and be featured in one of those pictures. Thanks, Sunny. So there's another question from Keval Gala. It says, I've been vegan for almost 14 years now, but I only follow the Jain diet during Paryushan. Are there any health benefits to the Jain diet? So we're saying Jain diet here specifically from someone who's already vegan. No roots, no onions, no garlic, root vegetables and everything, etc. There was an earlier question about whether or not there had been research done on the Jain diet or the Jain vegan diet. So I don't know if Dr. Jinnah Shah, I guess Dr. Mehta, Tushar Mehta is gone, or any of the other medically inclined people would like to answer that question, or maybe there isn't an answer.
I'll also ask Asha. I'm not aware of any particular studies. Certainly there are people that have allium-based intestinal issues, so garlic and onions might create disturbances, and so avoiding those would be helpful. We know that in sort of yoga and Hindu traditions, they also talk about such items being rajasic, so there might be Ayurvedic reasons that one might want to avoid root vegetables. Like there are some other Hindu and Buddhist traditions also that avoid them. But from a what we conventionally would consider evidence-based medicine perspective, I'm not really aware of research on that. Asha, how about you?
So yeah, it's a very tough question because we practice at our medical practice the whole food plant-based. And there's been a lot of research that, the allium family is very helpful, or, for cancer, protection of cancer is a huge. So it's always been a struggle whenever we have patients who are Jain and they want to kind of follow. It is a very fine line. So that's where I can say that completely devoiding completely off, because the root vegetables, they can be great calorie sources also. So that's where we come from. Yeah, there's been not proper, but completely devoiding is being tough for. I've been trying to look for that answer. I've not found. And one thing that's my desire. A few years ago, I had given a talk in, this was in Mumbai, India. We were talking about cardiovascular disease. What I really saw based on my friends and families back in India, there's a lot of chronic health issues within the community that were very strict and were not eating the onion, garlic, or greens, or, so it was impacting their health. So I want to go deeper into that. I really want to kind of get the source behind this. Where did this come from? So that's where I can say I'll definitely be happy to share when I'll be ready. But I did there was so many cardiovascular disease and this was purely Jain. All the data that I had it was in Mulund, or they all had chronic illnesses. They all were Jain. They were following Jain, diet. So that's where there's a lot of chronic illnesses also. So we have to really dig deeper into that. Yeah, I can share. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the chronic illness among Indian Americans, including Jains, there has been studies on dairy.
Dairy is a big one.
Saturated fat, the high intake of dairy in the traditional Jain diet as being a huge contributing factor. And I've been interested, and I haven't figured out how to do it yet, in doing a study kind of comparing those who are whole foods plant-based. I think we've talked about it, Asha, versus, lacto-vegetarians, and really showing the changes in health outcomes. But in terms of the traditional Jain diet, I mean, I think the other thing is, there's some controversy as to whether that was a later instruction, and if that's really originally what the Jain diet is. And so what we might consider to be a conventional Jain diet, avoiding root vegetables, is not universally accepted as, what Jainism hasn't always prescribed.
Yeah. Just last thing, Gina, you brought a very good point. When I was doing this presentation back in Mumbai, this was the question that had come up was, truly, was it only, because during monsoon season, it is tough because you are going to disturb so many, lives, as Ruchika said, the different kind of lives during. And that may be the good reasons, to kind of really minimize the ahiṃsā during that time. So yeah, that was a discussion that I remember, that did come up. That was it more with the environment, in respect to the environment more.
Thank you both. And I really think we're so lucky to have within the Jain community so many different experts in so many different expert areas, including in these medical areas and nutritional areas. So thank you both for providing those answers. Pivoting to a different topic that has been discussed in this conference as well as by Hope Bohanec. There's this question about why were cows in organic dairies more stress and or harm than cows in conventional dairies? That's coming from Maynard Clark. I believe, Hope, that you had spoken about that. Why organic dairies are more stressful for the animals than conventional dairies? It's a good question that's worth reiterating.
Yeah, like I was saying, the organic regulations, the organic standards don't allow for the farmers to give cows antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, medications that help them to relieve suffering through illness. They are often sick in these very intensive farming situations. They're stressed. They get illnesses and infections, and there's a high use of, and that's why the farming sector uses the most antibiotics in the U.S. Because they're giving them to these stressed and sick animals. But when a farm goes organic, when they're using the organic regulations and standards, they're not able to give them those medications. And so the cows can suffer even more. The infections go untreated. And like with mastitis, the udder can be so painful at milking, and open sores, pus, blood. It's awful. So it's just an example of why when we see these labels, like organic and certified humane, they may not be what the industry is wanting you to believe something that's not true. Most people think, well, it must be a little better, at least a little better. In some instances, it can be even worse. And that's, an example. Organic dairy is a good example of that. So. Nirva, did you want to say something?
Yeah, do you mind if I just jump in? I'm not a physician, but I did a report on pain medications in farm animals. And it's amazing that even whether it's organic or not organic, there's not a single pain medication that is approved for farm animals in this country. There is a drug that has proven results that is used in the UK, and it's called Medicam or Meloxicam. And that is being used in the UK. And the studies that the UK used to justify the use of meloxicam in factory farms were done in the United States. And they showed that the residue of that drug actually dissipates. It's gone after a certain period of time, so the milk is clean afterwards. So meloxicam is something that really should be introduced. I mean, because the animals are not just suffering pain from birthing, but they're suffering pain from castration, from dehorning, from so many of these procedures that are part of animal agriculture, and they just silently suffer. And you can use these drugs off-label at the discretion of the veterinarian, but how many times that happens, when it happens, we really don't know. And meloxicam, this is the last thing I'm going to say, meloxicam is approved for use in this country for dogs and cats.
Thank you, Nirva. Yeah. Okay, so does anyone else want to respond to that? There are some more questions I have here. This is a good question that often comes up about how we describe what we do within what we're talking about here in terms of animal advocacy and veganism. It's from Bhupen Mehta, who says, we should discuss the use and connotation of the word vegan versus plant-based, Jain lifestyle, whole food, etc. What is the better quote unquote word for the Jain community and the world at large? This is a question, I think it's a philosophical question as well as a practical question in terms of which word, how do we use, which word do we use to describe what it is that we're doing? And it's fine if others who are not on the panel want to chime in here, who are here, but vegan versus plant-based. What have you to say about this? Does anybody have anything to say about this?
I feel like internally in the Jain community, we can say vegan. It's a whole lifestyle. It's not just a diet. It's values-based. But I think for others, I think the reason that plant-based came to be used is because others have an aversion to the word, and it has provoked kind of a knee-jerk reaction that's prevented them from even taking incremental or reducitarian steps. And so, for example, what I've noticed in whole foods plant-based being used in a medical setting is that it takes the ethical connotation away, and it makes patients more able to hear what a lifestyle coach or a healthcare provider, a doctor is willing to say. And I've seen at some of these lifestyle medicine conferences, when I've spoken personally with Dr. Greger, Dr. Clapper, others in the movement, they're very careful to not want to sound like they're biasing their medical recommendations with ethical reasons to eat plant-based. So it really depends. Like, I think is embedded in the question. I think it depends on the purpose of the communication, the person speaking, and the audience. And you have to choose what fits the purpose of the communication. But for me, when I speak with Jains, I feel like I want to say there's a real ethical basis to what we want to do. Yes, there's health benefits. Yes, there's environmental benefits, but I want to say vegan because I feel it expresses more fully what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Thank you,
I'll just add, Gina, that was perfect. Absolutely, exactly. Well said. And I think it's good to remember that plant-based doesn't necessarily mean vegan. That the whole food plant-based diet can have some animal products in it, and often does. So just keeping that in mind, that vegan is something different. So plant-based diet is really around health, and it's important, and we want to eat whole food plant-based. But vegan takes it further into the ethics and into the animals, the planetary destruction, climate change, all of those things are included in vegan. And that's why I feel it's very important that we do embrace this term, that we do use this term, because it has a more ethical and weighty meaning.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it also, when we say vegan, and you tend to see this in the movement, that people tend to extend it not just to what they're eating, but to everything that they're doing, right? And so whole food plant-based is a part of vegan, just like vegan is a part of the Jain tradition in some way, right? Great.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to respond to that? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add, it's absolutely true. And I remember in Pratik's presentation yesterday, he was talking about insect life and the ants, and he had this wonderful image of ants who I think are really cute, honestly. I love seeing pictures of ants. And it's very true. As vegans, we are really looking to expand beyond just the shopping list, beyond just the meat, dairy, and eggs, avoiding meat, dairy, and eggs. And that goes into ahiṃsā, right? It just lends itself right into that nonviolence and living a nonviolent life. So that once it's funny because you go vegan and you're avoiding dairy and you're doing it for health, and then suddenly you're not killing the ants in the kitchen and you're being careful about getting spiders out of your house. So it's this beautiful kind of evolution into nonviolence that lends itself so well to ahiṃsā. So, yeah.
Thanks, Hope. Okay. So moving on to the next question. Here's a question from Sydney Jain. I think this is Sydney Jain from Chicago, who also gave a wonderful talk yesterday about the harms of dairy at the Chicago Center that I was very lucky to see on video. Here's the question. As I said, there's so much vegan stuff going on this weekend in the Jain community. It's wonderful. B12 is essential for us, but it cannot be obtained from vegan food. One argument I hear from my non-vegan friends is that human beings naturally need animal sources of food in order to obtain B12. The fact that B12 supplements are necessary make a vegan diet unnatural. This is what friends think. What are some good ways to counter this argument? So I know we've talked about B12 and supplements like this, but I think this is an important nutritional question that comes up a lot. So I don't know if, again, Asha or Gina wanted to respond to that, but please.
I think it's a philosophical question, because what is natural? Who's going to be able to claim a natural diet? And I think this is sort of part of the fallacy that gets people moving towards this paleo direction. That we're going to sort of glorify these Neanderthals who lived to 30 years old because they're more natural, or people reject agriculture because agriculture is not natural, right? So it's very, very hard to even interrogate what the word natural means in that type of context, because anybody who's criticizing veganism for not being natural for supplementation would have a very, very hard time showing that their diet is natural.
Great point.
I can just add, because, we are on a regenerative farm. And one of the things that I've learned that the way our soil, our food, when our patients, and this is just, when we don't know, there needs to be a lot of research done, but what Dr. Bryce suggests, when we eat from a regenerative farm, which is farmed very mindfully and, trying to keep all the microorganisms and keeping all of that, and just dusting off the soil off, a lot of that time, there are microorganisms on those, and they are beneficial for our body. So it's a very mixed, our soils are very depleted. We were designed to work in those environments. We were designed to be digging our hands into those soils, but we just have moved away. So I just kind of, there's this always discussion coming up about, why do we have to be taking supplementing of B12? But it's just that it's hard to get it any other way. Yeah. So this is just a thought that I wanted to share.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Dr. Bohanec said, and also what Asha is saying. And as I mentioned, older people who cannot absorb B12 as well, they may need injections. Even folks that eat dairy and other animal products may need to supplement. It's not just unique to vegans. And I've heard Dr. Clapper, who I was fortunate enough to work with for a bit, also say that basically our whole world is unnatural at this point. There is no natural diet. So let's not invoke that as a reason to not hurt animals.
combining.
We
Go
could
ahead.
also natural is not necessarily better because you know, the natural procreation of humans is that most children die at childbirth, and most women would die of childbirth. I mean, if we wanted to be natural, that's how we managed to keep our population in check until the modern scientific revolution. So natural is not necessarily better because in some ways nature actually wants you dead. So I mean, there's something to be said for that. And just because something happens in nature doesn't mean we should do it, right? So for example, if we look at like procreation amongst animals, which is often forcible, just because that's natural doesn't mean we should do it. So that invokes a naturalistic fallacy. Because something is a certain way doesn't mean that's how we should behave.
I think
Again,
sometimes we run into these kinds of issues when people bring in terms like natural, or there's also something coming in the Q&A about rights, and do insects have rights? So just realize these are not concepts that you get in Jainism, right? Jainism doesn't say do the natural thing. It says do least harm. It doesn't say animals have rights. It says we as human beings have the choice to do the least amount of harm possible to promote wellness among all. So when you try to reconcile some of these concepts, it leads to some contortions and difficulties. Let's bring it back to the Jain fundamentals, which, you know, I think that really provide a better foundation by which we can view our relationship with the world.
yeah, there's natural antagonism between rights and duties, right? People don't want to do their duties to society because it infringes on their rights. And the more we sort of brandish our rights and our entitlements, the less we're more likely to do our ethical duties. And so in some ways, discourse about rights can actually be very much against ethical duties. So there can be an antagonistic tension there as well, too. But then, of course, rights are also a good foundation to respect the inherent worth of a being, which, you know, if that's what rights are, the inherent intrinsic worth, then I think then it could be at least somewhat compatible with Jain tradition.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you all. So that was Sydney Jain who posed that question from the Chicago Center. And Sydney left another comment there saying that they should have clarified from an evolution standpoint that the argument of non-vegans is that we evolved to need animal food. And I think we've kind of covered that in this conversation, that that's also, and Sydney knows that argument is fundamentally flawed, right? So thank you, Sydney, and congratulations on the wonderful event you all had in the Chicago Center this same weekend. Another
additional point to that, Chris, sorry, really quickly.
Absolutely, no, go.
Because I understand that argument, and I get that argument a lot, especially non-Jains who are omnivorous, right? They'll say that we evolved to be omnivorous. So we have these like tiny little canines and they're useful, and shouldn't we continue that because it's natural? And I think what's important is that being omnivorous was useful at some point in our evolution for survival, because it allowed us to be opportunistic eaters, right? So we could survive in extreme conditions, and we were able to, even though I would argue we're not biologically omnivorous, we were able to process that and survive. There's also some evidence that potatoes helped our evolution. So it wasn't just animal products that we relied on. But at this point, I think the argument is like null, because we don't need to anymore. And that's really the question we should be asking. So can we evolve further beyond just our physiology, to evolve to do things that don't damage our bodies, don't damage the environment as we've seen, and certainly don't damage the animals? Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Nisha. It's a great point.
I might also add that it's kind of irrelevant how we evolved. What matters is what we do that makes us the most healthy. So arguing about what happened in the past, really, like, of what relevance is that when we're discussing what's the most healthy option, most environmental option, and what respects life on the planet.
Okay, wonderful. There's a question coming in. I believe it's from Alexa Weaver, and I believe that's Alex in Florida, if I'm not mistaken. And if that is Alex from Florida, we send our greetings to Jesse as well. The question is, any tips on finding primary care doctors who share these ethics and understand health through a vegan lens? Really good question. And really in all facets of life is when you're a vegan and you reach out for some kind of care, mental health, physical care, and all these things, are there resources and places where you can find people, medical doctors, for example, who can work with you and understand these needs? Does anybody have any comments on that besides watching Dr. Greger's wonderful videos online?
There may be something in this person's local area that I'm not aware of. And I don't know what to suggest specifically for Florida. I think there is, maybe Asha's aware, there's a similar, a center promoting a whole foods plant-based lifestyle in Florida. Did you want to say anything about that?
I think, that when you search in plant-based doctors, I feel that they definitely are very close to, the philosophies of vegan, and, they are pretty good. So I would start from that, plant-based doctors. I know, I'm trying to think, I think it was called plantbaseddoctors.com or something, because they do telehealth also.
There's plant-based, there's definitely plant-based telehealth that you can plant-based telehealth, and
that is another way, the avenue to do. A very close friend of ours is actually running that telehealth. It's I forget the name. I'll try to share it with Christopher later. But yeah, that would be a good resource, the telehealth. And if you're in New Jersey, we welcome you at Ethos.
And there's certainly many resources. Nirva has recommended a book that I also recommend. I interviewed Dr. Reshma Shah's book, Nourish, which is really helpful for families. So really focusing on children and families. So there's, it depends on kind of what you're looking for, but go ahead, Asha.
I always, when it comes to children, this is a very dear, Dr. Furman's Disease Proof Your Child. He was my primary care doctor. He was the one who changed us. 1995 is when I met him. If you ever get hold of his book, Disease Proof Your Child, I found it extremely valuable in raising my own two ones. So just wanted to kind of bring that for children, especially if you want to raise children.
And there's a website called plantrition.org, which has a whole database of plant-based doctors. There's also Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and I found a cardiologist through that who is a what they say about cardiologists. There's two types. There's the vegans and the ones that haven't read the data. So I understand the need and the importance for choosing a plant-based doctor.
And the name of the center in Florida is Hippocrates. So you may want to look that up in case that's near you in Florida, Hippocrates.
There's also a talk on YouTube by Dr. Priya Naik about how to talk to your doctor, because I know like a lot of people probably don't know a doctor who is vegan in their area. So how to talk to your doctor about going vegan. So that's available on YouTube. I think it was in the Atlanta Veg Fest or something. That's what the talk was.
And then to Tanisha's point, the Plantrition Project will list lifestyle medicine doctors. So like this field of lifestyle medicine is increasingly accepting the data, and people should be familiar with the health benefits of whole foods vegan diets. Sorry, Parvinji.
A quick Google search, I came up with Dr. Christina Cherian in St. Petersburg. She is a general physician who is passionate about lifestyle medicine and evidence-based nutrition. So I think Google search like that could help us.
Yep, and maybe to end on a light note in that regard with what Parveen is talking about and using technology, one of the questions came through from Maynard about using AI to get answers to questions about veganism. And I know that the Jain Vegan Initiative and Sunny Jain recently asked AI some questions about veganism, and I didn't know if they wanted to comment on some of the really kind of entertaining and very good responses they received in that regard, which I know are on their Instagram page. Sunny, did you want to say anything about that, or Pratik or Nisha?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go ahead and share something about that. And so when ChatGPT first was a phenomenon that not a lot of people knew about, we thought it would be interesting if we asked ChatGPT if Jain should go vegan. And so we essentially asked two questions. The first question is, why shouldn't Jains go vegan? So we played devil's advocate. Let's figure out why Jains should not go vegan according to AI. And the answer was, and just very short, too long, to read, is there is no specific reason why Jains should not go vegan. Some Jains may choose not to follow a vegan diet for various reasons. However, it is important for Jains to consider the principle of nonviolence and ahiṃsā when making dietary choices. And that was kind of the theme of that answer, and which was very interesting. So the AI was not able to give a legitimate reason why Jains should not go vegan. And then we asked the question, why should Jains go vegan? And the answer was Jains follow the principles of nonviolence and ahiṃsā, which dictate they should not cause harm to any living beings. By adopting a vegan diet, Jains can ensure they are not contributing to the exploitation or suffering of animals. Additionally, a vegan diet aligns with the Jain philosophy of minimizing harm and reducing the impact on the environment. And so essentially, AI was fully on the side of why Jain should go vegan. Quite an entertaining kind of post that we created, but it was really just to show that just AI compilating all the information that exists on the internet, that this was the answer they came up with.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that, Sunny. I think it's a lighthearted way to end, and I recommend people go look at that post because I really thought it was wonderful. If it's okay with everyone, we're coming to the end of time, but I did want to hand it over to our president, co-founder, CEO, Parveen Jain, to say some last words here.
Last words. I think the last words have to be thank you very much, everybody, for 2 great days of discussions. I attended every moment of it, learned a lot, particularly some of the speakers like Ruchika, and yesterday also some speakers talk about from personal experiences as to how they got into veganism and how they are promoting it, how they have lived it. It's a learning process. I myself became vegan about 3 years ago, and every day that I passes, I endorse that decision that that's the right step I did 2 years ago. Wish I had done that 20, 30, 40 years ago, but it takes some time for the tube light to light up. So, no, thank you very much for 2 days of very educational, I should say, learning experiences. Thank you very much. And this is what Arihanta Institute is all about. I don't want to plug too much about Arihanta Institute, but I want to say that one of the objectives we have is to bring people together, share their experiences as to how they are living Jain way of life. And then from there, we can have others learn from it and learn how to live the same lifestyle. So thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate that.